Okay. This is a very important Torah portion. Not that they're not all important, they are. But here in our Torah portion, we have something that even people that aren't all that aware of the Bible have heard about. That there was this man named Moses. He was out in the desert and he saw a bush that was burning and wouldn't be consumed. Well, it's his first face-to-face encounter with the Shekinah. And the Shekinah is a word that's not found in the Hebrew Bible, but it means the visible glory, the shining glory of God. He sees it in a burning bush, and he turns aside to see what's going on. So what is this? Well, the liberals say, that really what it was St. Elmo's fire. It's something that happened that just there are some bushes apparently in the desert that will start on fire all of a sudden because of the intensity of the heat and so forth and so on. Or some say it was volcanic gases coming out of the ground. There's nothing. But you know what? Neither of those are true, and none of those other explanations are true. This is the Torah, the Word of God, and the experience of Moses. It happened as it's recorded. But what exactly did happen? How does our Torah portion start out? Moses was shepherding the flock of his father-in-law Yitro, right? And that's why you have the Haftarah. How does our Haftarah start out? That the Lord will shepherd his people. As a shepherd, the Lord will guide his people. So that's the tie-in, but there's some other tie-ins too. So he comes to Mount Horeb. Now, Mount Horeb is another way of saying Sinai. Okay, so it's the same mountain where the Torah was given. When he encounters the burning bush, he turns aside to get a closer look at what was to him an obvious miracle. The bush burned but was not consumed. And then God speaks to him. The first utterance of God is to instruct Moses about the proper manner in which mankind would approach the holy God. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Now wait a minute. Is God omnipresent? Is there anywhere where God is not? Then isn't everything holy ground? What makes this holy ground? When we look at it in the Scriptures as a whole, it seems quite evident that holy ground means where God, or a holy place, a holy situation, is where God intends to reveal himself in a specific way. Not in a general way, but in a specific way. And that's what we have here. And what do we learn from the lesson of him telling Moses to take off his sandals? I think it represents, and the Scriptures talk about our living, our life, as what? Walking, right? How you walk. We call it in Hebrew, halakha. The halakha are the ways that we walk. And so we see it quite often where it says we walk by the Spirit. Right? I mean, in the Scriptures, if you open up your Accordance Bible software or whatever software you use, or even Strong's Concordance, and just look for walk, and you'll see all kinds of indications throughout the Bible. The walk means how you live. So where your feet are what touch the ground. I think that walking in a fallen world, a place where the rebellion of mankind abounds, means that we're all, as it were, unholy, unclean because of where we live and where we walk. Now, that's just a picture. It doesn't mean we actually are, but I mean, it's just a picture. I know I grew up in a household where if you did not wipe your feet when you came in the kitchen door or when you came in the front door, you were in trouble. We didn't have the habit of taking our shoes off. That's more common in our day, isn't it? There's a lot of people who say, just take your shoes off. Of course, over in Japan and Korea and so forth, they always do that. When I was there, they gave me a pair of sandals because I had tie-up shoes and it was hard to get them on and off. And so they gave me a pair of sandals so that I could come in and put the sandals where it's supposed to be and so forth and so on. So I think when he says take off your sandals, it means that was a symbol of not bringing that which was sinful into the very presence of God, or that which was fallen. Even as Yeshua, in one of his final acts, washed the feet of the disciples, So Moses needed to understand that his feet were dirty by the evil world in which he lived. And again, that's a picture. It's a symbol. Some people practice foot washing a lot. They see it as kind of an ordinance for the church or whatever. I don't have anything against foot washing, unless you have feet that are very ticklish. And then it's hard for you, for someone to wash your feet. But at any rate, it's a symbol of becoming clean in your walk. So such unholy aspects have no place in the presence of God. If a person would have communion with the Creator, then he must first divest himself of that which is profane. We cannot think that we can have sin in our life and have open access to God. The Scriptures teach us. If one regards or has sin in his heart, the Lord will not hear him. So, but what's the bigger point? From the symbol, let us recognize the reality. Yeshua is our only means of approaching God, whose holiness is a consuming fire. And only in the changed heart of redemption are we able to purify our conscience and serve Him as we should. Or to say it another way, the sandals must be removed. They cannot simply be cleaned up. He says, take off your sandals, not just brush them off. Redemption is not reformation. It is accomplished through death of the old and creation of the new. Now, we still carry the old, don't we? We carry that old, that sin nature. But what are we compelled to do as we come to the Lord? To put it more and more to death. Put to death the deeds of the flesh. That's called sanctification. Growing more and more like Him. Yes, Paul says, I die daily. I remember the thoughts that I shouldn't be there, and I get rid of them. And to piggyback on what Joshua was saying, oftentimes you can't just forgive once when somebody hurts you, when somebody sins against you, or when somebody does something. You got to keep on forgiving. Forgiving is giving it to God. It doesn't necessarily mean the relationship will be restored unless the other person is willing. But nonetheless, we forgive constantly. Don't allow bitterness and unforgiveness to lodge in your heart. If you do, it will only hurt you. It won't hurt anybody else. What's the second lesson we learn from this wonderful passage where God reveals Himself to Moses? It is that God keeps His promises. He next introduces Himself to Moses. Isn't that interesting? He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is, the God who has entered into covenant with His chosen people and intends to keep His word. As in our standing prayer, because we quote it, the name God is repeated with each name of the patriarchs to whom the covenant was established. We would expect when we read the Hebrew to say, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But it doesn't say that. What does it say? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And in the passage that we read, it occurred 3 times, I believe, where it keeps repeating it. The emphasis is upon the personal, one-to-one relationship that God has with His chosen ones. In other words, Jacob couldn't say, I'm in the covenant because of my father. No, you're in the covenant because God put you in the covenant. He's your God in the same way that He was your father's God, and same with Isaac. So we can't depend upon our parents to have a right relationship with God. Now, our parents can lead us there and help us there and encourage us there, but we must come to Him. We must say yes to Him. Yes, I give you my life. I ask you to forgive me of my sins. I want to be your disciple. I want to be your servant. I want to live a life that honors you. Help me. So the emphasis is upon that one-to-one relationship that God has with His chosen ones. Isaac's relationship and covenant with God was not via Abraham his father. It was directly with God, and so with Jacob, and now with Moses and the nation as a whole, and with each one of us. This is what distinguishes the true and living God from all of man's fabrications or idols. The God of our fathers takes the initiative to come and be with His chosen ones. He comes to us. God met Moses in the wilderness where he was. And this is the glory of it all. God moves to love mankind first, not vice versa. He doesn't give an inkling to Moses and say, hey, why don't you go out in the desert and see if you can find me? Moses didn't know he was going to be encountered by God. God came to him. He didn't go in search of God. God, just as in the Garden of Eden, comes looking for Moses. Remember, God was walking in the garden, right? We love him because he loved us. Now, I know the word first is in some manuscripts. This is why I have it in italics. But the reason that we love him is because he loved us. His love for us is the impetus for us to love him. You say, no, Tim, I was seeking him. Exactly, you were seeking him. You know why? He was drawing you. He was putting those breadcrumbs out. He was making life miserable, and you were wondering where in the world you could find some relief. Right? Yeshua said, no man comes to the Father unless the Father draws him, and I will raise him up on the last day. Can you just imagine that for a moment? The God of the universe wants and wanted from all eternity to have a relationship with you and with me. And we love him because he loved us. But why? Why does God go looking for sinful man in order to enter into fellowship and covenant with him? That's one of the questions we have when we read this passage. The only answer to this question is God's own sovereign desire. It was his purpose to seek out those whom he would save. God acts in accordance with his sovereign plan to accomplish his eternal will. This and this alone is the motivation for his interaction with mankind, and he never fails to keep his promises. To suggest otherwise is in every way to deny the very essence of the name, as we'll see. At the very core of God's being is love. And he loves not only within himself, for the Father loves the Son, and the Son the Father, and the Father loves the Spirit, and the Spirit the Father, and the Spirit the Son, and all. There's eternal love there. But he loves those whom he will save, and he brings us to himself. And he wants to be with us. He even dwells with us and in us. That's an essential part of who God is. He chose Abraham and his seed. As such, he promised blessing to them and protection. Now that the Egyptians were treating his chosen people with contempt, he moves to fulfill his word to them, to come to their aid and to rescue them. His promises are no less certain today, for he never changes. You know, sometimes we say, I see this happening in the Bible. You know, people are seeing bushes that burn and aren't consumed. I mean, there's all kinds of miracles. How come I'm not seeing that? Well, don't forget, you've got thousands of years compacted into one book. Do you think God could do that miracle today if he intended? That's our faith, absolutely. His promises are no less certain today, for he never changes, and his relationship in these promises is no less personal. Our names are inscribed upon the breastplate and worn over the heart of our great high priest, and even inscribed on his hands. Okay, God has chosen to accomplish his will through people. Why doesn't, we say, why does he make it so hard? Why doesn't he just say, let it be and it's done? Why do I have to do, Well, he's not dependent upon his people. He can get his work done without the help of anyone. He said, let there be light. It was light. But he, more often than not, chooses to use people to accomplish his purposes. This, of course, is a supreme blessing, to be used by God to accomplish his purposes. It is for this reason that the mitzvot, which is the Hebrew word for commandments, are a blessing. For commandments are the instructions of the king to those he has chosen as his servants. We can't even find a good illustration of this, but maybe a lesser one would be, let's say it's your goal in life, your absolute goal, top goal in life, to be an Olympic ski champion. And one of the past Olympic champions, gold medalists on the slopes, comes into your life, introduces himself or herself, says, oh, you're interested in skiing? I'll tell you what, I'll teach you how. But first you've got to do these exercises. Then you've got to do this. Then you've got to do that. Okay? Then when you get that done, we'll go up on the mountain for the first time. You say, no, just do it yourself. No, you wouldn't do that. If it was your goal to be a champion skier and one of the champions is there to help you, wouldn't you say, okay, yes, whatever it takes. What is the goal that God has for you and for me? That we should be like His Son. You say, well, that's never going to happen perfectly. You're right. Because He's eternal, He's infinite, and we're not. But will we be like Him? Don't you love that portion in the Gospels where some of the antagonists were being talked to by the disciples of Yeshua, and then they said, and it appeared to them that they had been with Yeshua. It's like, oh, they're just like this Yeshua fella. Isn't that what we should be? God first informs Moses of the situation that he, obviously, is aware of it. In other words, hey, Moses, I'm not stupid. I know what's going on. Then he informs Moses that he would be the divinely sent messenger, the one through whom God would accomplish His grand plan of the Exodus. Moses wasn't so sure. At first, this appears as a healthy expression of humility, but it ends in a show of apparent faithlessness. Note the three questions Moses asks. Who am I? And how would God answer that? You're the one I chose. And what they're going to ask me, what is His name? I'm not sure who I'm talking to. Is that what he's saying? And what if they will not believe me? And note God's answer. Certainly I will be with you. It really doesn't matter what strengths or weaknesses you have as long as I'm there, as long as you're doing what I told you to do. And then he says, I am who I am. What does that mean? My character is the basis of your trust. Who I am is going to give you success. Will you believe that? And then I will give you power so they will believe. Their responses are my concern, not yours. How often do we have the same questions that Moses has as we face the events of life? And I'll admit, there isn't one of us, myself included, that don't have some of these questions. We consider ourselves and recognize our insufficiencies. God promises to be with us, which ought always to be enough. We lack an accurate understanding of who God really is. We're not as diligent as we should be in the study of the Scriptures. God graciously reveals to us more and more as we seek to know His name. We list all of the ways that we're quite sure we cannot succeed, and God counters with all of the ways He intends to make us successful. But through this dialogue, He asks us to be faithful, to demonstrate our faith in Him, to trust that His presence and power will accomplish His designed plan in us. What is a characteristic of someone who is growing in their relationship with God by faith in Yeshua? It is a growing perseverance, a not willing to give up or give in about things that are important. All of us are weak. All of us get tired. We say, Lord, if this is what you want, if this is what you expect of me, I will do it with your help. And then, and I'm not going to get into this, put on the whole armor. Because it's not going to just be a cakewalk. We're in a battle. Now let's talk about the name, the God who is. What is the meaning of the four-letter name that God reveals to Moses? Boy, has there been enough ink spilled on this? Especially in the Messianic, so-called Messianic or Jewish roots movement. There are some congregations I've been to that, if you don't pronounce the name the way they pronounce it, God's not going to hear your prayers. I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, but I'll just say this. If you think the way that you pronounce God's name is necessary for Him to hear your prayers, you've entered at least a small point into idolatry. What is the essence of idolatry? The essence of idolatry is that the person can control the god or the goddess that they think they're worshiping. The idolaters do it all the time. When I had my office down on Portland Avenue, there was a Buddhist group not too far, and I used to go over to the grocery store, and they had a little Buddha, with a bowl of apples underneath. And one time I just said, I hope it wasn't mocking, but I said, does he ever eat those? They said, no, it's just a figure of Buddha. I said, oh, okay. But they thought if they put little things out like that, if they did this, this, and this, then he would be favorable to them. They control him by what they're doing. We don't control God. God has revealed himself to us. So, this is called the Tetragrammaton. There's a big word for Scrabble, those of you that have a lot of M's or something. It means a four-letter name, or 4 letters. It's this name that Jews and those worshiping with them from ancient times refused to pronounce, substituting what we call circumlocutions. Now, they did this superstitiously. I don't hold this view. If I knew how to pronounce this, I would use this name, just like I would say God's name is Yah, or Elohim, or El Elyon. They think that if you pronounce this name and do it incorrectly or for the wrong purposes, you will never be forgiven. And that's how they understand one of the commandments, that you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, for whoever takes the Lord's name in vain will not be forgiven, or not be cleansed, or however you want to translate it. That's not what that means. And it doesn't say will not be forgiven. It means literally will be held accountable, which is true for all sin. So, as a result, it's become commonplace to substitute heaven, or Adonai, or Hamakom, the place, or Hashem, as substitution for Yod, He, Vav, He, those 4 letters, okay? We use Adonai because this seems to be precisely what the Hebrew text uses, okay? And I'll explain that. This gets a little technical. Bear with me. I know it's a little warm, and we've been here a while, but okay. The 4 letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, in one stage of biblical Hebrew, or the Hebrew in which the Bible was being written, were consonants that stood for vowels sometimes. Okay? The He stands for an A-class vowel. The Vav, the one stroke, can stand for an O or an U. And the Yod can stand for an I or an E or an A. This is because in Hebrew, vowels were not written. Everything was consonants. But if you have the word Ish, how many of you know what the Hebrew word Ish means? Aleph, Yod, Shin. Means what? Okay. Well, you got to put a vowel at the end of it to make it woman. Isha. We don't have any vowels. Uh-oh. How do we differentiate between man and woman? We put a vowel at the end. How do we let people know there's a vowel there? We put a hey. You don't pronounce the hey. It just stands for the final vowel. So, all that to simply, you understand? Do I need to go over that again? Okay. Yod, He, Vav, He. How do we pronounce this? And some people think it's all vowels. How would you pronounce this if it were all vowels? You don't know. I mean, it's impossible to speak without consonants, right? All right, so in the Masoretic text, I'm in the middle of page 4, paragraph D. In the Masoretic text, this is the text which we have, which is the most reliable or the most complete. And what did the Masoretes do? They made up vowels with little dots and little dashes. They couldn't make new letters. Why? Why couldn't they make new letters? Can't add or take away. And the way that the scribes counted the letters to make sure they didn't leave any out, right? You start adding letters, things don't work. So they make little marks, okay? The Masoretes indicated a karei kativ. This means, and it's well known that Yod He Vav He was never to be pronounced. So what did they do? They put the vowels of the word you were supposed to pronounce under the letters. Yod He Vav He. Okay? So, what were the vowels of Adonai? A, O, I. Okay? So they put those vowels there to remind you when you come to it and you're reading in the synagogue, you say Adonai, you don't try to pronounce the name. Well, the early scholars that were doing work in Germany and so forth and so on didn't know this. And they said, oh, it's Yehovah. Yahovah. The vowels of Adonai put on letters that could be consonants. That's where you get the word Jehovah. And it's a misnomer. There's no name Jehovah. Okay? And remember that the J and the Y are interchanged in languages, particularly English to German or German to English and Spanish as well. But sometimes, is this getting too technical? Some of you falling asleep. Sorry. Okay. It's too warm. Maybe I'm falling asleep. Sometimes you have Yod He Vav He, the four-letter name, okay, followed by the actual word Adonai. And sometimes you have Adonai followed by Yod He Vav He. Now, if you're going to substitute Adonai every time you see Yod, the four-letter name, you're going to have Adonai, Adonai. That doesn't let anybody know there are actually two different names there. So what the scribes determined to do was to put the vowels of Elohim on Yod He Vav He, so that whenever you come to Adonai followed by Yod He Vav He, you say Adonai Elohim. And again, people in the Messianic movement are trying to say, no. The scribes didn't know what they were doing. They gave away the secret of how to pronounce his name. I wish that were true, but it's not. And there are really no accepted scholarship that gives any idea how the name is pronounced. Now, in scholarly places, they say Yahweh or Yahweh when they're reading a paper or something. Then they want to pronounce Yod He Vav He. But I've actually seen some Jewish scholars get up and leave when they do that. But at any rate, well, any questions on that? Is that somewhat clear? The whole thing is that you have consonants and you have vowels of a different word. And when you're reading along, and another thing, those of you that are learning Hebrew, when you're reading the Hebrew Bible, if you find a consonant without a vowel, you know there's something wrong. Every consonant has to have a vowel, except in minor cases at the end of a word or something like that. So if you find a word that doesn't have enough vowels, you look over in the margin and it tells you what you're supposed to pronounce. Okay. Many scholars have taken the position that the name is somehow tied to or based upon the Hebrew word haya, which means the verb to be. Now here's another. I know I'm getting too deep into grammar here and people are not going to maybe like it, but it's okay. You know how you know the verb, if we say present tense, how would you say I am, right? Present tense. How would you say past tense? I was. How do we say future tense? I will be. All right. In Hebrew, there's a will be and there's a was, but there's no am. There's no present tense of the verb to be. Now, in modern Hebrew, there is hoveh, but not in the biblical Hebrew. So, if I were to say, I am in Tacoma, I would just say, ani, I, bet Tacoma, in Tacoma. I in Tacoma. So now, what did he say in our text when they asked, what is your name? When he said, what name should I tell them? Ihyeh asher ihyeh. I will be what I will be. How did the Septuagint translate that? The Septuagint didn't quite know what was going on, I don't think. Because the Septuagint translated it, ego eimi. I exist. I am. Because there is such a thing in Greek. Does that sound familiar? In John, so chapter 8, chapter 10, Yeshua was talking to the Pharisees and so forth, and eventually they, now I've kind of lost my train of thought, but at any rate, they asked him, he said, I came from the Father, and he said, and they asked him other questions, and they said, they took up stones to stone him, and they said, because you make yourself out to be God. And he said, before Abraham was, I am. It's almost certain that he had to be speaking Greek. Because even in English, that's bad grammar. We should say, before Abraham was, I was. He didn't say that. He said, I am. Now, if they were and I'm sure they were very, very aware of this, of the Septuagint, that Greek translation, which was done in the 3rd century BCE, okay? So 300 years before Yeshua came incarnate. If they were very familiar with the Torah in the Greek, they knew that when Moses asked, "What is your name?" in the Greek it says, "Ego eimi." What did Yeshua say when he said, "I am"? Before Abraham was, "I am." He said, "I am one with Yod He Vav He." I am Yod He Vav He in the flesh. And that's why they took up stones to stone him. I talk about that on page 6. I know it gets a little bit technical, but I think he was speaking Greek, and I think that was the normal language that they conversed in, because not all of the Jews even knew Hebrew. Many of them were Hellenized, and they had become Greek speakers, and Hebrew was something they had in the synagogue, but not something that they were conversant in. At least some of them weren't. Paul was. I think when Paul says, "I am a Hebrew of Hebrews," that means that he grew up speaking Hebrew. But he obviously spoke Greek as well, though it seems like he had a helper sometimes when he was writing his epistles. So, and I talk about that on page 6, that whole idea. All right. On page 7, the practical ramifications of knowing God's name. How should we apply these things? I'm keeping my eye on the clock as well. First, the sacred name of God emphasizes that he always does what he says he will do, and he never goes back on his promises. To suggest that God has not kept his word in teaching that the covenant made with Israel has now been abandoned, or that the eternal nature of the Torah has now been changed. I can't believe how many scholars I've recently heard or read who say that Yeshua destroyed or abolished the law when he died on the cross. I just can't, it just baffles my mind. Yes. I guess I've said that before. I won't make... But it just does not make any sense to me unless you can say that what God has promised he doesn't keep. To suggest that God has not kept his word in teaching that the covenant made with Israel has now been abandoned, or that the eternal nature of the Torah has now been changed, is in essence to besmirch or to dirty the name, to drag it down to a level comparable with man himself. Moreover, to live as though the eternal word of God has somehow fallen out of importance, or that the commands which he revealed as eternal have now been set aside, is likewise to disregard the very meaning of his name. This is part of his name. I will be what I will be. In other words, I will never change. It is an egregious error that so many people who confess a true faith in God and his Messiah, Yeshua, can at the same time dismiss parts of eternal word as though somehow they are temporal or currently inapplicable. You know, people have said to me mockingly, "Oh, well then, when the neighbor boy is taking God's name in vain, you take him out and stone him?" I said, "No, we don't have the right to do that. Neither did anyone else in the first century, unless the judges said so. When they were trying to stone someone without any authority, they were going against the Torah." So, and say, "Well, why aren't you giving sacrifices?" I can't. There's no priesthood. It's to be in a temple in Jerusalem. And then they asked the big one. Well, if there were a temple in Jerusalem and a priesthood, would you offer sacrifice? I said, yeah. Just like Paul did. So the question is God with us now? And does he remain the eternal, unchangeable God who was likewise with Moses and ancient Israel? Then how could it be suggested that the word of the Eternal One has somehow become irrelevant and no longer in need of being obeyed? Rather, encapsulated in the very name of God, the revelation of his eternal nature and being is the promise that he will always be with his people, and that therefore his unchanging word is likewise the possession and guiding light of all those who are part of his family through the miracle of his grace. I skipped by this, but I'll just say it briefly. When he says Ehyeh, that I will be, if you have a program like a computer program, or you can look it up in a good accordance, whatever, start with Exodus 3, where we have this in verse 14, I will be what I will be, and see how many times I will be is found in the next context. Numbers of times, he says. And what does he say to Moses? I will be with you. 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 It's part of his name. And what did he say in Malachi 3:6? For I, Yod He Vav He, do not change. Therefore, you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed. Secondly, then, we sanctify the name by living out the reality of its meaning. We live on the basis that what he has said is true. We keep the mitzvot, the commandments, and we live a life of faith based upon what he has said he will do. Let me just emphasize this. It doesn't mean that we're judging the people who don't keep the commandments. It doesn't mean we're saying, oh, you can't be a believer. No, we're not saying that. There are plenty who I think are following their teachers. What do the scriptures say? Don't let many of you be teachers, my brothers, knowing that you will incur the stricter judgment. Why would a teacher incur the stricter judgment? Because people are going to follow his teaching, and it better be right. It's a little bit scary, honestly. We all err at times. Hopefully when we do err, we try to make it right. If we live as though what he has said is irrelevant, then we have lived in a way that defames the name and fails to sanctify it. Thirdly, our life of faith has as its focus his name, and Yeshua is the revealer of his name. For it is, and by the way, when I say his name, I'm not talking about just how to pronounce it. I'm talking about the name is the very, it's all of who God is summed in one word or one line. The name is the essence of the being. And by the way, how did he tell us who he is? By just telling us? No, by showing us. The Greek idea in the day of Paul was simply to say, if I can argue my way to it, it must be right. If I win the argument, it's true. And what was the Hebrew way? Show me. I want to see it. God revealed himself not by giving apologetics, although apologetics are very important. But he didn't do that by saying, here's a syllogism that you can give to know who I am. No, he said, I'm the creator of heaven. I'm the creator of the earth. I'm the creator of mankind. I'm the one who has spoken to you. I'm the one that's come looking for you. I'm the one who has preserved you. I'm the one who have given you all that you needed. Follow me. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And what did the sailors on the boat with Jonah said? You know, what God do you worship? What does he say? I am the God who has these 10 attributes. No. That could have been an answer, but it wasn't. I serve the God who created the heavens and the earth, the sea, and the dry ground. And guess what? You're in the sea and you're hurting. You're looking for dry ground. So, our life of faith, as it focuses his name, and Yeshua is the revealer of the name. For it is by Yeshua that the covenant is ultimately realized for Israel and for all attached to her. No one can truly sanctify the name apart from a full acceptance of God's Messiah, who has come to reveal the name in fullness. The oft-repeated verse, Psalm 118:25, in connection with Yeshua's role as Messiah is, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yod He Vav He. To come in the name of Yod He Vav He means to come bearing the name, to come with the mission of revealing the name and accomplishing those things that only Yod He Vav He can do. Therefore, to disregard Yeshua or to discount his role as the owner of the name is likewise to disregard the one who sent him. Note these statements of Yeshua in John's Gospel. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. If God were your Father, you would love me. He who hates me hates my Father also. I am no longer in the world, and yet they themselves are in the world, and I come to you, Holy Father, keep them in your name, the name which you have given me, that they may be one even as we are one. In another place in the Gospels, it uses the word inherited, the name that I have inherited. Did he not have this name from all eternity? Yes, he did. So what does it mean, given? Well, inherited maybe is a better understanding. You know, if you have a true inheritance, it means you already own it, even if it's not in your possession. When Yeshua came as the incarnate one, this is the mystery, he gave up some use of some of his divine attributes, his divine power. He came and was given a name, Yeshua, Savior. But he had the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh from all eternity. He is one with the Father. And you say, well, can you explain that to me? No, I can't. I can't explain the infinite oneness of God as he has revealed himself in a plurality. Same way you can't, at least I don't think we can, describe this. A man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one. How is that possible? We're as separate as you can be, and we're different. But we are one. And any of you who have been married for any length of time know that there's something there you can't quite describe. You know, how she will finish your sentence for you, and it's right. You know, and how you can tell, I better help here, I better be careful here, I better say the right things here, and you're right. There's some wedding together of soul and body and mind in a way that only God could perform. Yeshua is the incarnation of the name, and thus a sanctification of the name is equally a reception of and submission to the Messiah, who is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh incarnate, and who therefore is the very revelation of the name. The mystery of the divine nature is therefore found in the singular name, found in the commission of Yeshua to his disciples. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name, singular, of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The text does not say in the names, but in the name. The mystery of the oneness of God is therefore expressed in the fact that Father, Son, and Spirit equally bear the name, yet function as a plurality within the eternal oneness of God. This is not presented as an ontological or philosophical axiom, but rather as the reality of God with us, Emmanuel. For Yeshua goes on to promise, and look, I am with you. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly what God said to Moses. He said, I don't know if I'm up to this. I don't know if I can do this. And what's the first thing God says? I will be with you. That's the last thing that we have recorded that Yeshua said before his ascension. Well, one of the last. I shouldn't say the last. In the phrase, I am with you, he reiterates the essence of I will be what I will be in our Torah portion. In the same manner, Yeshua promised his disciples that the Spirit would abide with them, the Spirit of truth whom the world cannot receive because it does not see him or know him. But you know him because he abides with you and will be in you. So the proof that God never changes is found in the reality that he remains eternally with his people. It is the abiding and unchanging presence of God with his people that secures their salvation, and it is God's desire to dwell with his people that reveals the very essence of his nature. I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Oh, I have more than that? Okay, Rena said I have more than that. I want to make just a few remarks about our Haftarah passage. The chapter, I go back a bit because we're in Isaiah 40. It starts out with comfort, O comfort my people. Remember we read that on Shabbat Nachamu? Why? Your warfare has ended, iniquity removed, the kindness of God to his people is twice as much as the discipline. He says you received twice as much of his love. What does this tell us? It tells us that God's word and his promises are sure. We read in verses 7 and 8, all flesh is grass, and all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades. When the breath of the Lord blows upon it, surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades. But the word of our God stands forever. This, again, is our foundation. Don't let anybody take the scriptures away from you by telling you that somehow, that's not really what it means, that was added, so forth. You need to have these books in the Bible that you don't have. No. There will constantly be an attack upon the scriptures. Why? Because the scriptures are our foundation. The power or omnipotence of God is revealed in his works, as I've said. God is the creator of heaven and earth and all that is in them. The attempt of the enemy to deny God as creator and to give some kind of naturalistic power for creation is an attempt to deny that God is and that he is the one in control of all things. this has pervaded our society, hasn't it? The public schools, by and large, I don't know, there may be some that are able to do differently, maybe Joshua, but in science classes, even in grade school and up through junior high and high school, they're taught evolution. Children come out of our schools just knowing that somehow it all got started, we don't know how, and from there it just was a naturalistic kind of a thing. What has the enemy done in that? He has sought to defeat the very name of God. There's the attempt then to replace God, which is idolatry. God mocks, the prophet mocks the idol worshippers, right? If you talk to someone, when we were in the Philippines, there was this group up in the mountains that carried around this log that they said was their God. It never touched the ground. The tribe had certain priests, whatever, they would rotate 24/7. They would carry this log around. They would pray to this log. But if you ask them, say, do you really think the log is your God? No. The log is the symbol of our God. That's what they say. Well, Isaiah mocks them, say, yeah, you go out and you get a piece of wood and you make an idol out of it, and the goldsmith puts his gold on it, and then you bow down to it. It can't hear, it can't smell, it can't taste, so forth and so on. But that's the reality. The reality is that there are no other gods than the one true God. They're all made up. So then, what is the power behind the idols that seem to be evident? It's demons. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:18-21, look at the nation Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altar? In other words, don't you get to share sometimes, right? If it's a fellowship offering, you eat part of the meat, it goes part of the meat on the altar. What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that the idol is anything? No. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. And by the way, here, the table of the Lord is not talking about the communion table. It's talking about an altar. Remember in Ezekiel, when the new temple is made, the altar is called the table of the Lord. And further on in 1 Corinthians 10, it talks about the altar being the table. Why? This is where the meat was put. So when he says, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons, you cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons, it means you cannot worship, give offerings to the one true God and to pagan gods at the same time and think that you'll be received. No. You cannot do both. So we want to rid ourselves of all aspects of idolatry. And finally, in this Isaiah passage, God, who is the Creator, has revealed Himself to us in the creation. We had it in our psalm, right? As we read the psalm this morning. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the dome of the firmament shows forth its handiwork. And what does Paul say in Romans 1? He said, even the invisible things of God are made known to them by what is created, so that they are without excuse. He's revealed Himself to us in the inspired Scripture, the written Word of God. And most of all, He's revealed Himself to us in Yeshua. Now, we have not seen Yeshua with our own eyes, but we have an inspired record of His words and of His teaching and of His actions. We read in Hebrews 1:1-4, God, after He spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the world. And He is the radiance of His glory, and the exact representation of His nature. And as I've said before, that exact representation is the word that's used to make, they would take a piece of iron, and they would carve out, or copper even, they would carve out the image in reverse. Then they would take a little ball of copper, and they would put that die on it and strike it with a hammer, and it would transfer that image. That's the same word that's used here. He's the exact representation. This is why Yeshua said, if you have seen me, you've seen the Father. But no one can see the Father because He's a spirit. What does it mean? If you know me, you know the Father. just a few comments on the Acts passage. The vision to teach Peter that the Scriptures are the foundation for knowing what God considers holy and what he considers profane. Don't think that you can ascertain God's will by some miraculous event in your life only. God may use that. But the Scriptures are the final test. And that's what happened with Peter. Let me explain it this way. We read in our portion afterwards, after Peter learned the lesson, but how did he learn the lesson? He said, you all know how unlawful it is for a Jew to go into the house of a Gentile. Is that unlawful? Where does the Torah say that a Jew shouldn't go into the house of a Gentile? Only rabbinics. Only man-made law. Yeah. Good one. So here's how I envision this whole thing in chapter 10 of Acts. God gives him a vision of some sheet full of all animals, clean and unclean. They were, because it says swarming, right? And the swarming are never clean. Now, if that word were used of fish, yes. But if it's used of lizards, if it's used of other kinds of things, which the same Hebrew word is used. Okay? So here's a man who's holy before the Lord, seeking to be holy before the Lord. And what does he tell the Lord? He said, God gives him a command. The command is what? Take and eat. And what does Peter say? What happens when you say no to God? Big trouble. And what happened when Peter said no to God? Nothing. Here's what I'm reading between the lines. He said, no, Lord, for I have never eaten anything unclean or unholy. And now I'm paraphrasing, okay? Now I'm putting between the lines. God says, good, Peter, you passed the test. Where did you learn that? It's in your Torah. This says what I can eat and what I can't eat. I said, good, right. Okay, Cornelius, get up, or Peter, get up and go to the house of Cornelius. No, Lord, you know how unlawful it is for a Jew to enter into the house of a Gentile? Oh, really? Where did you find that? Peter, what I have made clean, don't you consider unclean. He said, oh, I learned my lesson. I didn't find that in the Torah, where I was supposed to exclude myself. Now I understand. He went to the house of Cornelius. Yeah, verse 28, right. Read it. Or I could. I guess I need to because you don't have a microphone. Acts 10:28. It says, and he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a man who is a Jew to associate with a foreigner or to visit him, and yet God has shown me that I should not call any man unclean or unholy. How did he show him that? He showed him that in that vision. And he put it all together and said, yes, Lord, your word must be the measure by which I measure all things. So what is the enemy going to do? He's going to try to diminish the word among us. So it's my plea to you, if you're not used to reading the Bible every day, get in the habit. You know, with all of the advantages we have in our world today, you can program something on your phone, you can program something on your computer, you can give all kinds of things so that you can read, you know, say, well, how much should I read? Read a chapter a day. You know, and if the chapter's too long, read half of it and read that next half the next day. And ask the simple questions. What does this mean? If you don't know the answer to it, start digging. It's fun. You know, there's all kinds of opportunity. We have dictionaries, we have encyclopedias, we have all kinds of things where you can look something up. A good Bible dictionary, you can look something up and get an idea of where is this city name, or what does this mean, this word. You look it up in an English dictionary, and more often than not, a Bible English dictionary, and you'll more often than not find and it'll get you on track. And then so ask, what does it mean, or what does it say? Make sure you understand what it says. What does it mean? And then the biggie, right? What does it mean for me? In other words, how, not that it means something different to everyone, but how do I apply this, what I've learned here, to my life? Am I doing it? Is it working? And how can I grow in it?